Right, we are recording. I shan't do that, you're okay. Rachel, it's so lovely to actually meet you as a real person. Yeah.
Yay!
Not just a tiny picture on Facebook when I go, who missed that there? And there you are in all your radiant glory. I admire your tapestry, your cactus, and a sliver of a bookshelf that suggests you have books. You're not going to show off about it. I'm very impressed. Your cactus is still alive.
It is. This is one of the pluses of lockdown. I've managed to not kill off any plants, so I'm very proud of this fact.
It looks lovely. It looks lovely. Rachel, tell us a little bit about you. If I say PC, pre-COVID, life, home life, working life, studying life, the whole shebang. So who were you before this all went weird?
Yes, so I'm a bit of an imposter to the Clergy Shielders group because I'm not clergy.
Not yet.
But I'm not yet. I have this.
Oh, I'm envious. Yeah. It should be pink, really, shouldn't it? So you're in the pink tapestry and the love of pink.
Absolutely,
anyway.
then I'll be really coordinated. So I'm home life. I'm married and got 3 boys. One's 24, 2 are 23. The 24-year-old wasn't living at home pre-COVID, but has come to live home during COVID.
Okay.
And the other 2 live at home with us.
Okay.
So family life is a rich tapestry. So the twins are both on the autistic spectrum.
Okay.
And our Chris has cystic fibrosis. So I've been a carer basically for lots of years.
Okay.
Trying to juggle that, but I'm also from November 2016 I became the lay Church of England leader in our Anglican Methodist Church.
Okay, snappy title. Yeah. And what does that mean in practice?
So it means I meet people for all the occasional offices, but I don't take them.
Yeah. So
I lead worship, I preach occasionally, pastoral stuff. Chair church council from time to time, all the sort of church leadership sort of stuff that you do really, and I'm also a second-year ordinand, part-time, so in theory I will be ordained next summer.
Smashing. Who are you training with?
So training with All Saints Northwest.
Gotcha. And you enjoy? I can't say how you're enjoying it, because if you're not, you have to lie, and if you are, you're just
I know, it's wonderful.
And your tutors will be like, oh, she's one of our best ones. Apart from the F word, formation.
Absolutely. Oh yes, that word that we know and love.
Oh, the formation word. So you already had a massively busy life, and then COVID came along, and that's changed everybody's lives, no matter what they were, who they were, what they're doing. How has it changed home life, ministry, and training for you?
Well, we'd gone through a sort of really unsettled patch anyway, because my mum had been very poorly for the last sort of 6 months, and then she died at the beginning of February. So we'd only just had her funeral at the end of February, a couple of weeks before lockdown came along.
Okay.
So when COVID came along, very quickly we realised we were going to have to shield, although we didn't know the word shielding. No. The days where we didn't know about Zoom and shielding. And we realised very quickly that if we all tried to shield together, home life would implode probably within 24 hours. So we basically made the decision that the only way forward was to live as 2 separate households. And my mum's flat is actually next door to us. So my husband and one of the boys moved into the flat there. They could then both continue working. Yeah. And then I've stayed at home with my son who has cystic fibrosis and CF-related diabetes. And our eldest also came home to live with us. So it was a pretty tough start to the whole lockdown, really. It was feeling a bit of a grief upon grief, really, being separated at a time where you'd want to be together.
Yeah. Have you seen much of your husband and your son who live next door? So like, hiya, through a window. But how was that? How have you kind of kept that relationship when you're separated by a wall? Have you seen much of each other, or is it just WhatsApps through a kitchen window? Or
well, latterly we've seen a bit more of each other, but initially we started to sort of the WhatsApp video chatting, but I found that too hard really, so we went back to just chatting on the phone most of the time, sort of seeing him walk past the window, whatever. But we were pretty disciplined about it for certainly the first 8-9 weeks.
Sure.
And then there came a point where he went, you know, we just need, what I missed was his presence. It wasn't talking to each other, it's just that presence. That was the hardest thing. That was what I missed so much, really. So we would drive out separately to somewhere and just sit and have something to eat and just talk and just be with each other without talking, which was just lovely. So we've tried to make that happen more since.
Okay. And how about your ministry and your training? How has that had to adapt and reshape itself according to lockdown and shielding?
Well, that's all gone completely online. So I've had a couple of teaching sessions online by Zoom, and the assignments, of course, carry on.
Relentless.
And now we're building up to a week summer school at the end of July. Okay. So that's been a bit of a sadness of lockdown, because that's about, you know, it's a really special week to be with the students from the whole of the Northwest get together, and you get to know each other a lot better just being together all of that time. So but they've already done Easter school with the final year students, so I think they've learnt from that and tried to make the summer school programme manageable for people, because we're all in very different situations, really.
Yeah, of course.
So and then we have a break. August is a break.
It's not really a break though, is it?
I'm telling myself it is. Don't tell me it's not.
Well, you never know. Of course, by August, everybody will be out. The shielders can roam free. It's all, well, we'll wait and see. So you guys had the shielding notification way back, you know, whenever it was, and the whole 12-week thing, and you put it on the calendar, and that 12-week thing has kind of come and gone, and now we're sitting in a no man's land of everybody's going out with their social distancing on the beach, in the parks, in Liverpool City Centre to celebrate the win. Social distancing, interesting concept. And of course, shielders officially from the 1st of August, we can roam free. And the churches are now being told they can if they wish, and if it's I use the word safe, risk mitigation things are in place, can now reopen for a version of public worship and not as we knew it. Some of the people I've been talking to who are shielding clergy and shielding church leaders kind of have said, you know, at the beginning we were in it together, but now it feels like an awful lot of people are running on ahead, and there's a real feeling of being stretched and distanced. How does it feel for you watching churches and life begin to reopen, but knowing that, or feeling that maybe you should be part of that, but actually you can't be?
It's been really hard, because I think at the beginning there was a sense we were all in it together, and then as time's gone on, it's felt a sense of being left behind, really, and then with your sort of church leader hat on, trying to think about what your responsibility is towards the whole church community, while carrying all the things you feel about being a shielder, and knowing other church leaders are making different decisions than I feel I can. So yes, you know, churches can put all these things in place, but it doesn't make it safe. It just makes it less of a risk. And so I think in conversation with the clergy, I feel like we're speaking a slightly different language, because of the sense of threat to my son is enormous of COVID. So I can't use the word safe. I wouldn't use the word safe. It's just less risky, and I feel that not only towards him, but I feel that towards anybody of any vulnerability in the congregation. You know, you feel a responsibility of wanting to just go back to meeting together when it is safer And I don't think we're anywhere near a point where I feel it's that, you know, that I don't think we're at that point yet.
I've got a couple
Certainly won't be on the 1st of August.
Yeah, 1st of August, we'll see. It's a long way till then. A couple of friends I was talking to who are happy to talk to me but didn't want to go on camera, which, you know, I've got about 20 people who I've talked to but not on camera, just so that people out there know that the people I've been videoing are not the only ones in the situation, that there's a whole load more people behind the scenes. And a few of them said that they, because they weren't the shielder person, it wasn't their medical thing, but they opted to shield alongside. They were now feeling a sense of being pulled into different directions, which was people saying to them, you don't have to shield, you could now step back into your leadership role. And your husband, because it's my husband who has to shield for his kidney transplant, that we're trying to keep his healthy kidney in one piece, you know, it's a great gift, let's not waste it. So there's that kind of sense of being pulled of, maybe I should pick up the priestly reins and start doing stuff, but then what if I bring it back in the house and everyone going, oh, it's safer now, it's fine, and that real pull of, I'm going to put him first every time, because the world can do without me as a priest, but he can't do without me as a wife, and I don't want to do without him as a husband. And I expressed this off camera to somebody else who went, oh, that's exactly it. We're now being pulled back into the leadership role and away from the shielding protective role, and which one's going to win, and the guilt that can go with that.
I think there was a turning point for me probably about 4 or 5 weeks in, where I was just feeling quite miserable and just thinking this could go on for, you know, ever. At that point, amongst the sort of CF community, there was talk of you might need to shield until there's a vaccine, and people were talking in it was when they started talking about quite a lot in the news conferences about, well, we might have a vaccine in the autumn, we might never have one. And you're sitting there going, what does this mean? What will this mean for us? And all of that. Yeah. And that was quite scary, because at that point I was thinking this could be a year, you know, and trying to get my head into that sort of mindset. But I remember a day where I suddenly thought, I was feeling resentful that I couldn't go out, because I'm quite a sort of, I'm an introvert extrovert middle grounder really. So the introvert in me doesn't mind being at home on my own quite a bit, but the extrovert part of me is going, I need people, I need people
to be out there.
I want to be out there with you who are just walking past my window. And I was sort of watching people walk past and just feeling, I just want to be out, I need to be out. And then thinking, well, actually I could go out. Yeah. I could do whatever really, but I'm going to choose to stay here because of my love for my son. And that was a real shifting point for me in terms of just a sense of agency. Yeah. And in a sense, I think that's driven how I've felt since, that actually he has to come first, just like you're saying about your husband. Yeah. And if there is a pull, that I have to just keep going back to that, and thinking, I understand why people might want me to do X, Y, and Z. As it happens, we've got a hugely supportive church council, and nobody at the moment is running to be back, and nobody yet has put any pressure on to go back, you know, which I'm hugely grateful for, because I know that's not everybody's experience at all. Okay.
And here's the big question, because this is part of your formation, so treat it as a formation question. I feel like I have been a trainee incumbent to curate, so I'm suddenly putting my TI hat back on and going, I should get deep now, shouldn't I? So, so formation question: where or has God been in this whole thing, in terms of your relationship and your spiritual life before COVID, and how it may have shifted or changed during this period? So, where's God been in all this?
I think, having gone through some pretty tough stuff over the years, I think I remember going to a parenting challenge conference run by Care for the Family when the boys were very little, and somebody basically just saying, well, I won't use the word you used, but in the messiness with us, basically.
When it hits the fan, yes.
Yes, exactly. And it was one of those sentences that has never left me. It was quite transformational for me, about where God is in it, that, you know, Jesus was born into messiness and is in the messiness with us. So I think it's just a central part of my faith, that God is in the messiness with it. And, you know, this has been a messy time, it would be fair to say. So I think I found initially that I found it really hard to pray, because I think it was, you know, grief on grief, as I said earlier. And but I think when Chris was diagnosed with CF, I remember, you know, with my good evangelical upbringing, you know, you should pray, you should have your daily quiet time and all of that stuff. And it was so painful that I couldn't. And I felt so guilty about it. And just one day sitting looking at him, there's this little tot in this incubator, thinking, just sensing God say, you don't have to. The whole community is praying for you. You're being carried.
Yeah.
And actually, so since then, when I've gone through really tough stuff at times and found it hard to pray, that I don't feel guilty, and I let myself know there are lots of people praying. And I found that really helpful. I found that really helpful at the beginning of this season, I suppose. And then I found it very difficult to settle and just be quiet. I was on the go the whole time, because that's all I could, that was how I coped with it, I suppose. And then halfway through, we were supposed to have a course retreat weekend, which obviously we couldn't go to this beautiful place near Crewe. And so we had a week-long at-home retreat. And I confess, I know, well, I confess I was so sceptical about this and thought, oh golly, that's no, you know, that's a bit rubbish compared to what we could have had. And but then I thought, you know what, I'll clear my diary. Not that there were a huge number of engagements in my diary, but cleared the things that I was going to do, and I thought I'll go with it. And you know, that was an amazing week of stopping and hearing God speak and being able to pray much more easily again, and being quite humbled by that God could turn up at home. He didn't just turn up in Crewe in the Oblate Centre.
You mean God is here?
Well, apparently so.
I think I'm waiting living room. I'm not done with it.
Again, I think at the very beginning, literally on day one, I had to sort of completely change how I lived, because Dom and I share Chris's care routines and stuff. And he tends to do most of the cooking, so it was like, oh, how's this going to roll then?
Take out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hello,
so I decided so I decided that there was some things I just had to write down, because I'm too dippy. I forget, like, do Chris's medication and this sort of thing. But in a moment of I don't know what, I decided that I would stay the morning office, which I have never found, I've never really got on very well with. But it was a moment of, come on, do this, you can do this. But I've actually strangely quite found that helpful. And in the sense of, I'll do it, whether I feel any great revelation from it or feel close to God or not is not the point. It's just the discipline of it. So, and I've, amazingly for me, because I don't tend to finish many things, I have carried that on. I'm
impressed.
And also, you know, again, for me, a huge part of where God is in conversation with friends. You know, friends who've known me for donkey's years, as well as, you know, newer friends. And that's a huge place for me of encountering God, really, and other people.
Conversation with other people. How have you kept that going when, because I know my first instinct when someone says let's have a chat is, right, coffee shop, where's halfway between you and me, and we meet at a coffee shop and we have cake and cups of tea and what have you, and it's just been, and we don't, not having that, I've had to think, how am I going to catch up with them now without the excuse of cake? So how have you kept those health-giving relationships and conversations going when you haven't had the usual places you can go and do that?
Well, one of my friends, she rang me on day 2 and just said, I've been thinking about you, and there's lots of people I could stay in touch with, but I've decided I'm going to stay in touch with you quite a lot. And her husband's clergy, so she gets sort of my life and whatever. And but we don't get to see each other in person that often. So phone conversations is the norm.
Sorry, I just jumped because a face appeared in my kitchen window. I told you before we started recording this was happening. It's my husband and my son and the dog have gone out for a walk to give me some space and time to do this with you. And I said, when you come back, if I'm still recording, just appear at the window and give me a little queried look, and I'll either give you a subtle hand off camera thumbs up, or and of course I knew what would happen is they would appear. And I'm like, oh, what's that? Oh, my husband is fine. I'm putting him a little. We're still recording, so come in quietly. There's nothing like professionalism in interviewing, and this is nothing like. Oh, sorry. So your lovely friend took the initiative and said, I will keep ringing you. I will keep that going because I know that you need this.
Absolutely.
Oh,
and she's known me sort of before husband and children.
Yeah.
So we go back a long way, and we've shared a lot of the life journey, you know, so that's just been fantastic.
Oh, that's great.
I think the hardest thing has been staying in touch with people on the phone who I'm used to seeing in person. And that's never the same. And I think I had an experience, I think it was about 7 or 8 weeks in, where one of the cystic fibrosis nurses had to come into the house to see Chris.
Scary.
To flush a device he has in his chest.
Yeah.
So we prepared him for it. She came in and she went, and she's absolutely lovely. And I just broke down. I was really quite broken after it, because, you know, she's not somebody I know particularly well, but the impact of having somebody physically present in this space, the difference that made to having spoken to her on the phone, I just couldn't get over. And it made me realise how much I miss being with people.
Physically being around people.
Terribly.
Yeah,
it's been hard.
So, top tips for other people out there who are watching us in our professional way of doing this. I'm so sorry. Yeah. I have an overactive startle reflex in my left leg, so I'm a nightmare to go see a film with in the cinema or a theatre. My left leg hits the ceiling, and I'm like, it's fine, just my left leg. It's a bit nervous. That's impossible. Not thank you. Sorry, B. Top tip for not killing yourself and your family when you're in lockdown. Well, B, anyway. So my very first shielding interview was with Rachel Knoll, and she said her top tip was to go and buy wholesale chocolate in very large bags and then hide it around the house so she couldn't eat it all in one go. That's crocheting. I thought, and it kind of all went downhill from there, really. Miranda talked about, you know, having things in place. Somebody else said, don't have things in place. What have you found has really worked for you as a household, a family, as for you as Rachel, that have helped you not just survive lockdown, but actually find yourself and thrive? What are your top tips for surviving this?
Probably the two things that have really helped. One was, on day one, I wrote this list of things that I was going to do. I sort of a weekly planner, if you like. These are the basic things I'm going to do. That included speaking to a friend every day and making sure I do my son's medication. Because the first week, I'm so used to the husband doing it that I would go to bed. I think, oh no, got to get him up, go downstairs, prepare it. So having it on the list was helpful. And I actually decided at the beginning that I was going to try and keep up my 10,000 steps a day.
10,000 a day?
I know, that's got sort of changed as we've gone along. But I was really disciplined about it for 3 weeks. We just have a garden path that I know far too well now. Just go up, down, round the patio, up, down. I must just look like a mad woman to the neighbours either side.
But it's to keep moving, isn't it? It's to keep moving and not be static. Yeah.
And just to be out of the house, because I'm used to being out of the house quite a lot. So my son introduced me to podcasts, so I've been listening to a lot of podcasts of all sorts of different things. So the list was crucial, but I think probably, the chocolate thing kind of came and went. So Mondays would be, when you do the shopping, Dom, don't get me any chocolate. Thursday would be, chocolate, please. So we went through that cycle quite often. But I think, the other thing really, the main thing has been find your safe spaces.
Okay.
Initially things that I thought were safe spaces then didn't feel quite so safe, because I realised there were people who were thriving in lockdown when I was just falling apart, and it was really hard to see lovely pictures of them having a lovely time and all of that. That sort of was quite difficult for some time. So this friend who's been ringing me, been an enormous sort of support, and a couple of other key people who have been people that you can just say, this is how it is today. Might be different tomorrow, but this is how I am today. And I often work out what I think by talking. So some very good listeners amongst my friends.
I know what I mean about things, places that are not safe. So initially in the first few weeks, I was lapping up the news. I would watch the briefings. I would be on the news app. I would be on social media, just trying to get. And after about week 4, I thought, actually, I remember my bishop when I got ordained saying that ministry is a marathon, not a sprint. And if you sprint off at the beginning of it, you're going to burn out within the first 4 years of curacy and blah, blah, blah. And actually, those words came back to me at the beginning of COVID, thinking, actually, this is a marathon, not a sprint. So I just need to back off the news and just see what Twitter thinks of it all. I'll get my social media, editorial from Twitter, in the light of whatever got said, what does it actually mean for people? Rather than put myself in Hancock's half hour every
absolutely
Mojo's flying circus. So I stopped watching the news altogether for that.
I did the same thing. I think by about week 3 I was really struggling with a bit of anxiety, which isn't something I'm used to dealing with, and a GP friend said, just monitor how much you're watching the news. And so I started turning off some of the notifications as well on WhatsApp and Messenger, because that was going mad as well. And I used to just look on the BBC roundup of the day, key indicators, because I just couldn't cope with it either. But that was all having to learn new ways of being, really, because normally I would be just interested and want to listen to it all, but it was actually not helpful, was it? And listening to the news is interesting, just because I tend to wake up to the news. And a couple of weeks ago was just when they'd announced about social bubbles. And 3 days on the trot, I heard these lovely, heartwarming stories about people being able to then see relatives or friends. And they weren't, I knew that for some of the congregation, this was going to be really transformational and wonderful. And for 1 minute, you're just caught up in the joy of that for some people. And then they would just go, but this doesn't apply to Shielders. And that was 3 days on the trot. That was tough. And that was just very much in that period where it started to feel, we're left behind here.
And it's tough, isn't it? Because I think for shielding households, there's always an assumption that, well, you already got company, so you don't need to form a bubble. It's like, I have seen the same 2 faces and the dog for 14 weeks. I would really like to see somebody other than the people I live with, because, too much of a good thing. I love them, but seriously. So
absolutely.
And it felt like, and I know all of my single friends who are shielders are just like, I can form a bubble, I can see somebody. And I'm like, I would like to see somebody other than the people I've been looking at for that.
Yes, absolutely.
But I wouldn't want to be setting policy, because always going to get it wrong somewhere. But the shielders feel like the forgotten category of people. Wow. Well, thank you so much. I have loved talking with you. All the things we said off camera were just as much fun as on camera, but people will never get to know what that was, because we didn't press record at that point. But it's been an absolute hoot, and the world has got to see the fact that I don't edit anything that goes on these things, even my own ineptitude. It all stays there. I mean, if you dropped dead in the middle of the interview, I might have stopped it. But so every cloud has a silver lining.
Made it through another evening.
We're not going to push our luck on that one, though. No. So before I stop recording and we have a bit of a laugh off camera, I'm going to say, Rachel, thank you so much for being one of my volunteers for this wonderful series of interviewing wonderful church leaders who are in shielding households. And I just hope that between now and the 1st of August, things continue to get better and the numbers continue to be healthier, and the outside world continues to be safer. And maybe I'll be doing some more interviews at the end of August to see how we're all doing with whatever it looks like then. But in the meantime, Rachel, you are an absolute star. Thank you so much.
It's been great to chat. Bye.